Modifying the general education curriculum. As a special education teacher, I teach math in the special education setting, but also support students who are in the gen ed setting. This year I felt more disconnected than any other year in terms of collaboration. So my passion project became my dream for how PLC with gen ed teachers and special ed teachers would collaborate in order to support the learning of each student. As I start, please feel free to pause at any slide. Students in special education are always gen ed students first. They deserve access to the general education curriculum and also the same high expectations that are set in gen ed courses. Although these learning outcomes or the instruction might be modified to fit their needs, it's still expecting them to work hard. This means that in a PLC, both teachers must collaborate in order to share their specific skill sets and reduce any inequities so that each student can succeed. So if a PLC has a growth mindset for each student, that's students are able to make progress and be successful, they need to ask, how can we make sure each student gets there? How can both teachers use those skill sets to determine if and how to modify the curriculum and ensure learning for all? Here's an example of benchmark that I remember teaching this year. It's a 6th grade benchmark. Now, for our unique learners, especially those who receive math instruction in the special ed setting, maybe this benchmark needs to be modified. This is not lowering the bar. You can still and should have high expectations for your students, but they also must be attainable and realistic, giving timeframes. So knowing this benchmark, the PLC together needs to discuss what background knowledge is needed in order to meet this benchmark, what is our time frame, and what is the purpose and what do we want students to get out of the benchmark. Step 2 is to decide on curriculum modifications. So let's say that your PLC, and this is just an example, decided to modify that benchmark to calculate the area of squares and rectangles. So now your PLC has to discuss how to get students to that point, knowing that these unique learners might not have the same level of background or prior knowledge. So, along with the gen ed teacher's knowledge of content and the special teacher's knowledge of instructional strategies, how can we move these students from a concrete understanding of area to a representational and abstract understanding of area? How can we give students multiple points of access? And what can we do to build background knowledge of area and squares and rectangles that these students may be lacking? It's also important to know what your students already know, so get pre-assessment data and already have an understanding of where they're at and their learning needs. So after deciding on modifications, then it's time to think about instructional strategies. So it's important that students first get a concrete understanding of area, really do hands-on learning, and that could include working with manipulatives like Legos, geoboards, Unifix cubes to really see and feel what area means. And there's also a lot of great literary connections you can make to area too. The next step will be moving to a representational understanding of area. So really seeing area instead of doing it. And that would include like drawing pictures. Graph paper works really well to talk about area. So students can draw pictures to show area. Next would be an abstract understanding. So being able to use the formula area equals length times width or base times height, being able to use that in order to find area given problems. And it's important to talk with your PLC on whether or not students are going to be allowed to use calculator, or if maybe the modification is that they are allowed to use their multiplication chart. But again, these are questions you can talk with your PLC about. After you do this first step of planning, then the next step for your PLC would be to discuss, find evidence of student learning, is it working, and look at assessment data. So, like I said, this was my dream project for how PLCs can collaborate in order to provide or to support the learning of each student, including those in special education. If you have any questions about this presentation, please don't hesitate to ask. Here is my works cited if you want to read more about any of the research that I cited. They all were super informative, so I definitely suggest it if you're interested. Thank you for watching and listening.